Genesis. I'm going to read from chapter 45. I'm going to read verse 1 through 3 this morning. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, "Have everyone go out from me." So there was no man with him. When Joseph made known to his brothers, he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard of it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So Joseph, at the time that he was living with his family, was um, Jacob's favorite son. Um, and this made the brothers very jealous already to begin with. But Joseph had the ability to interpret dreams that uh, God had given him. And uh, a lot of the dreams that he had didn't set too well with his brothers. So at first, his older brothers wanted to kill him and make it look like it was an accident, like some wild animal had got him. But the youngest, or the next youngest, I guess you would say, Benjamin, didn't want to do that because he knew that that was wrong, even though selling Joseph into slavery was wrong as well. But he was able to convince the brothers not to uh, kill Joseph, but to sell him off into slavery. But they still went along with the story that uh, Joseph was dead uh, to to Jacob, their father. So Joseph was a teenager, I think, during this time. So now Joseph is 30 years old um, when he is ruler over Egypt, just under Pharaoh. Um, and he got that position because he was able to interpret Pharaoh's dream about 7 years of plenty, then 7 years of famine. And as a result, because of his ability to interpret Pharaoh's dream about what was to happen, Pharaoh made him ruler over everything. And Joseph, under God's guidance, wisely stored up um, grain in all the cities of Egypt for those 7 years of abundance. And sure enough, after that 7 years was over, the famine hit. And it wasn't just Egypt, it was the world that got hit by famine. And so Egypt was the only one with food, and Joseph would sell it to anybody who would come and buy it for the Pharaoh. So his brothers are sent by Jacob to buy food, all but Benjamin, all but the youngest. And that's in part because Jacob was afraid that something would happen to his youngest son, like what, in his belief, happened to Joseph on a same on an outing with his brothers. Um, so Joseph, of course, recognized all his older brothers, but because of so many years had passed, his brothers did not recognize who Joseph was. And I say that Joseph disguised himself, so I would imagine Joseph probably disguised his voice or the way he talked was probably the primary thing. Um, I don't know how else he would have disguised himself other than just wearing, you know, the typical Egyptian wardrobe that he probably was already wearing. But through two outings, um, uh, they come back, and Joseph just he couldn't contain it anymore. He couldn't go on uh, lying to his brothers about who he really was, and so he finally revealed himself to them. And him crying, him weeping, probably is a mixture of emotions. I would think of being happy and being relieved to finally reveal to his brothers who he is, and and over with with the deception that he was doing to his brothers. But instead of joy, his brothers were dismayed. They were in shock. I mean, could you imagine what was probably going through their minds? They probably thought that they were going to either be put into slavery themselves or maybe even killed. Um, yeah, they didn't know how to take it because, for all intents and purposes, the last thing they would have expected was to see Joseph as ruler over Egypt. Bar none. Because they sold him into slavery. So, you know, in their mind, he was probably off serving somebody, just, a forgotten nobody. You know, and Joseph was far from that. Because Joseph just asked a simple question. He wanted to know, is my father still alive? And they couldn't answer him. They're like, and it kind of makes me think, how many times have we've all done something in the past, and then it came back to bite us, so to speak. Because this is pretty much exactly what happened. They sold Joseph off. They played him up as being killed by a wild beast to his dad. Problem solved. Story's intact. We're good to go. And then all of a sudden, they learn that not only is their brother alive, but their brother now has power to do something to them, and it's beyond their control. So I imagine part of that dismay is fear and anxiety of what's going to become of them all. Because because at one point he had already held onto one or two of the brothers because he wanted to see Benjamin. Um, and of course, he wanted to see his father. And of course, eventually, Jacob gives in and sends Benjamin, and and of course, Joseph did a lot to, I guess you can say, pay them back for what they had done, because he would uh, with Benjamin, he put his silver cup in Benjamin's bag of grain when they were going back and overtook him, and then of course he was going to imprison Benjamin because he quote unquote stole from them after the kindness that they were shown, and and so they were, of course, they were all just freaking out, and then they had this bombshell hit on them after that. Um, I mean, they were obviously beside themselves. But good news was, instead of doing what Joseph could have done, Joseph did the opposite of what they expected. He forgave them. He told them about his life in Egypt, how he had two sons, he was married, um, and the most important thing he did, which I covered in a previous devotional, is that he let them know not to be angry or dismayed with themselves for what they had done to him, because it was all part of God's plan for this to happen. Joseph took the high road and trusted in God throughout his whole time here. He had successes, a devastating um, time when he was in prison due to a lie of his master's wife. But then, because of the interpretation of the dream, he rose up to be second overall of Egypt. But that was all because he believed in God, he followed God, and he never doubted God's plan. He didn't know what it was, but he did not doubt that God was going to take care of him and that God was going to provide for him. And as far as the brothers, um, they were completely stunned by Joseph's, you know, reaction and demeanor and forgiveness. And in the end, this famine brought a family back together that was torn apart from within, so to speak. And that would not have ever happened if Joseph had not trusted in God. Um, but, the devotional is called Dismayed, and, and it's because of the brothers. Because the truth of their brother being alive and in such a formidable power was just a revelation and an unraveling that they just could not handle. Uh, and instead of rejoicing, they feared for their own lives and their own safety because uh, in our sinful human nature, who would blame Joseph for doing whatever to his brothers for what they did to him all those years ago? So, if I don't know, now I'm kind of losing my track of thought. Um, so if something that we've done has come back and it kind of I don't want to say blow up in our face, um, but it makes us have anxiety or concern. I think we just need to remember to to trust in God, and it also may be a sign that and a chance for us to ask for forgiveness. Um, I don't know. Well, I just lost my track of thought there. So, anyways, I love you guys. People ask, trust in God, trust in His plan for you. No matter what you're going through, God will see you through whatever. Believe in that. I love you. See you tomorrow. Bye.